Okay, so go next day, week 44, day 3. It's Wednesday, nearly midnight. I still make it. So we're gonna read one page from English dictionary. Dictionary is this one here, Advanced Learner's Dictionary. I really liked it when I started reading it. Now I think it's not as amazing as I thought, but not too bad. Okay, let's go for it. So we read this one before, and it's the next page. Afford. Use afford with can, could, or be able to. Don't say that someone affords something. It's too expensive. We can't afford. When will we be able to afford a new TV? Affordable. If something is affordable, most people have enough money to buy it. The availability of affordable housing. Affordability. Research into homelessness and housing affordability. See also feature box at the town. Afforestation. Afforestation is the process of planting large numbers of trees on land which has few or no trees on it. Since the 60s, afforestation has changed the Welsh countryside. Affray. An affray is a noisy and violent fight, especially in public place. Affray. It's formal. Affray. Oh, it's weird. It's the accent on the last syllable that's so pretty rare, I think. Affray. Affront. If something affronts you, you feel insulted and hurt because of it affronts you. His reforms had so affronted many of his natural supporters in England. Affronted. He pretended to be affronted, but inwardly he was pleased. If something is an affront to you, it is an obvious insult to you. Affront. It's an affront to human dignity to treat people so poorly. Affronts. Afghan means belonging or relating to Afghanistan, or to its people or language. The Afghan, capital Kabul. An Afghan is a person who comes from Afghanistan. Afghan. Aficionado. Aficionado. If someone is an aficionado, of something. If someone is an aficionado of something, they like it and know a lot about it. Aficionado. I happen to be an aficionado of the opera, and I love art museums. A jazz aficionado. Afield. Further afield or further afield means in places or areas other than the nearest or most obvious one. Afield. They enjoy participating in a wide variety of activities, both locally and further afield. So it means places or areas other than nearest or most obvious afield and further afield. If someone comes from far afield, they come from a long way away. Many of those arrested came from far afield. Far afield. A fire. If something is afire or is set afire, it is on fire or looks as if it is on fire. A fire. aflame. If something is on fire, you can say it is aflame. Afloat. If someone or something is afloat, they remain partly above the surface or water and do not sink. Afloat, they talked modestly of their valiant efforts to keep the tanker afloat. If a person, business or country stays afloat or is kept afloat, they have just enough money to pay their debts and continue operating. They are borrowing just to stay afloat, not for investment. Afoot. If you say that a plan or scheme is afoot, it is already happening or being planned, but you do not know much about it. Everybody knew that something awful was afoot. Wow, what a cool new word. I haven't heard this one before. Afoot. Everybody knew that something awful was afoot. Aforementioned. 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 If you refer to the aforementioned person or subject, you mean the person or subject that has already been mentioned. Declaration. A declaration will be issued at the end of the aforementioned UN conference. Aforesaid. Aforesaid. Aforesaid means the same as aforementioned. The aforesaid organizations and institutions. Afoul. If you run afoul or someone or something, you do something which causes problems with them. All of them had run afoul of the law at some time or other. Afraid. If you are afraid of someone or afraid to do something, you are frightened because you think that something very unpleasant is going to happen to you. She did not seem at all afraid. I was afraid of the other boys. I'm still afraid to sleep in my own bedroom. If you are afraid for someone else, you are worried that something horrible is going to happen to them. They were afraid for their own safety. If you are afraid that something unpleasant will happen, you are worried that it may happen and you want to avoid it. I was afraid that nobody would believe me. The government is afraid of losing the election. If you want to apologize to someone or to disagree with them in a polite way, you can say, I'm afraid. We don't have anything like that. I'm afraid I can't help you. Afraid. Don't use afraid in front of a noun. For example, don't say an afraid boy. Say frightened boy. What's the best frightened boy? What's the best way to comfort a frightened child? Frightened, yeah. Afresh. If you do something afresh, you do it again in a different way. They believe that the only hope for the French left is to start afresh. African means belonging or relating to the continent of Africa or to its countries or people. The African continent, African countries. African means belonging or relating to black people who come from Africa. Traditional African culture. Dance music with African roots. African is used to describe someone, usually a black person, comes from Africa. African woman. An African is someone who is African. Fish is a staple in the diet of many Africans. African American. African Americans are black people living in the United States who are descendants from families that originally came from Africa. The African Americans are 12% of the population. African American is also an adjective group of African American community leaders. African Caribbean. African Caribbean refers to people from the Caribbean whose ancestors came from Africa. Modern African Caribbean culture. An African Caribbean is someone who is African Caribbean. Afrikaans. Afrikaans is one of the official languages of South Africa. Afrikaner. Afrikaner means belonging or relating to the white people in South Africa, whose ancestors were Dutch. An Afrikaner is someone who is Afrikaner. Afro. Afro is a very tightly curled and sticks out all around your head. An afro is an afro hairstyle. Afro is used to form adjectives and nouns that describe something that is connected with Africa. Afro, very well known Afro-American family, an Afrocentric fashion show. Afro-Caribbean. Afro-Caribbean refers to people from the Caribbean, whose ancestors came from Africa, Britain's Afro-Caribbean community. An Afro-Caribbean is someone who is Afro-Caribbean. Well, circular argument. An Afro-Caribbean is someone who is Afro-Caribbean. A very good dictionary. I think I'll mark it out as a funny sentence, because that's exactly how not to do definitions. An African Caribbean is someone who is Afro-Caribbean. An Afro-Caribbean is someone who is Afro-Caribbean. What? Really? Alright. Aft or aft. Aft. If you go aft in a boat or plane, you go to the back of it. If you are aft, you are in the back. If you are aft, you are in the back. It's a cool new word. I like it. Now I see after is really long on the other side. So we'll give it a go. We'll finish it, and tomorrow we'll be reading this page. Hopefully I won't break the chain. Never break the chain. That's a Seinfeld productivity method. Look it up if you watched it. It's a pretty cool method. Productivity method. Itchy today. Alright. If you watched it, thanks for watching. If you didn't, which you probably didn't, good for you.